The nations were united. The Big Five, China, Russia, Britain, France, and the United States, led the peoples of the world as they launched a rule of international law and a Bill of Human Rights.
In the aftermath of the Second World War, the UN really was an expression of hope, and it was the birth of the international community as we know it today. It was the first time we started having an expectation that there is such a thing as a shared humanity, that we have universal laws, universal norms, and that the international community should come together and work together on the problems that we face. I think to people it represented the idea that this is something that is a global project and that everyone has a stake in. I think that is probably the biggest achievement of the early years, creating those expectations that the UN and states and people have tried to live up to ever since. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a document that personalizes the promise of the UN to individuals. It's this idea that we have a shared humanity, we have a shared responsibility to one another. So this is really about saying that I am affected in a very direct way by rights violations that diminish someone in a faraway country. And that gives them some measure of hope for protection, for justice and truth. In those early years, peacekeeping was very much about monitoring an armistice agreement, the withdrawal of troops.
These successful armistice negotiations have demonstrated conclusively the ability of the United Nations to mediate a serious conflict and to avert a dangerous threat to the peace.
That is a model that's been hugely successful. It helped to deliver peace in places like Namibia, El Salvador, Colombia, Sierra Leone. But I think today it is a model that is harder and harder to implement. It's also really hard to find funding for those missions. We spend about $7.5 billion a day on war and on our militaries. We spend that a year on peacekeeping across the world. The eradication of smallpox is a defining achievement of the UN. It was about engaging the scientific community to develop a vaccine, but how do you mass produce that? How do you store that? How do you transport that? It was a logistics issue. You needed to have not just doctors and nurses, but community workers. It was a whole of society effort. And I think that represents what the UN can do at its absolute best. The UN's role in advancing women's rights, empowerment, and gender equality has been really transformative.
My dear friends, I would like to welcome you. It is the first intergovernmental meeting in the world where women form part of virtually every delegation.
In 1995, there was a landmark UN conference on women where states adopted something called the Beijing Platform of Action. If you look at how many more millions of girls are not just going to school, but are completing 12 years of education, you look at the attention that people now pay to issues like modern slavery, trafficking, sexual violence in conflict. So there are huge advances that we have seen over the decades in terms of literacy, political inclusion, economic inclusion. I think it's been really transformative.
Will those in favour of the draft resolution please raise their hands?
One of the criticisms we hear of the UN is that it is a talk shop. I actually think that's one of its most important functions. This is one of the only spaces where countries can continue to come together and interact, regardless of how terrible their bilateral relations may be or whatever issues they're facing. It forces them to come together. And I think that prevented, on a number of occasions, things from getting very, very bad, probably prevented some kind of nuclear confrontation. The fact that the Cold War remained cold is something that we can credit the UN with.
We stand ready to take
the next steps down the road of cooperation through verifiable arms reduction.
The Millennium Development Goals were transformative on many levels. You have a series of very specific goals around which countries can coalesce. That means they can align their national priorities, their national resources with a global endeavor. The fact that you have clear, measurable goals also means that the people in those countries are then able to hold their governments to account in a very specific way with reference to an international framework. The number of people living in extreme poverty was halved. School access grew massively. You got millions more people in school. Maternal mortality was slashed. So I think we saw what a coordinated push around some very specific issues can achieve. In the past decade, we've seen the Paris Agreement on climate change, the Sustainable Development Goals.
It is so decided.
The Sustainable Development Goals, I think, were one of the highlights of the past decade. It represented the will of governments to come together, but it was also a huge public consultation and engagement exercise. People care about what is agreed at the UN. And I think most people know that their government can't just solve climate change. Most people know that things like misinformation, pandemics, they cross borders. There's no way that their government can do it alone. We saw some of that again during the COVID-19 pandemic, when you really had different sections of societies, different parts of the UN come together to say, this is our action plan for halting the spread of COVID, testing, developing vaccinations, but also how do we respond to the economic impact of this crisis? How do we respond to the social impact? So again, I think it was a really good example of what the UN can achieve. And as long as the need is there, you do need to have an organization like the UN that can work not just on these individual issues, but actually look at the links between them. Ultimately, governments have to deliver for their people. And the UN, multilateralism, these are tools for governments to deliver for their people. The UN continues to symbolize the hopes of people. It did that in 1945 and it does that today.
80 years ago, the world planted a seed of hope. That peace is possible when humanity stands together.
There is a shared humanity. There is a hope that things will be better going forward than they are right now. That is a very human characteristic, that we have the capacity to hope and the will to work together. And that fundamentally is what the UN represents. It's a way for people to place their hope in something that is bigger than them and that connects us all.